Welcome to the City Debate Show. Join me around the table today, the Manchester City reporter at BBC Radio Manchester, Ian Cheeseman, and former Manchester City captain, Andy Morrison. Listen, we're going to talk transfers, understandably, in a couple of minutes, but let's look back to the Wigan game, because, Ian, I wasn't there, I was going off your commentary, but a word that came to mind, not always appropriate for City this season, resolute.
Yeah, definitely. I actually said to Mark Hughes after the game, I thought it was City's best performance this season. Now, a lot of people would say, rubbish. What about the Portsmouth? What about the Wigan? The Stoke, the Arsenal? But I actually thought they showed a different side of the nature, maybe a little bit more of a Mark Hughes team after the game on Saturday, because there was a lot of determination right from the off. There was a better balance to the side. I thought Zabaleta playing in front of the back four was a massive success. I thought he was City's man of the match. Micah Richards perhaps looked a little bit more comfortable at right back. I thought Nader Manua played really well. There were a lot of positives. There was hardly a negative in that game, and it wasn't just the football that they played, but it was the determination. I've seen Wigan a fair bit recently, and they're a very good side, very determined side, deserve to be where they are, and I just thought it would be a tough nut to crack, so it proved, and I thought City were excellent.
Now, Andy, was that your type of performance, that a little bit more grit about it on Saturday?
I think once Richard Dunn had been sent off, then it became resolute. I thought up to then, and especially in the first half, I thought they were excellent, and creating many, many chances. And I thought Alano linked very well with Robinho. But, once a player was sent off, and I think if you saw it on the television, you saw the reaction from Mark Hughes, it was like, oh no, here we go again. It's going to be a day. But they dug in, and I think he was probably a very, very relief man at the end.
Can I ask you about Nader Manua? He's not had too many opportunities, but Ian and Nigel Glegon on commentary on Saturday certainly described what sounded a really top performance from the lad.
Yeah, it was. He had a job to do, and Heskey is probably a player that would suit Nader, because if it comes to a physical battle, strength and pace, nobody will outdo him. He's a phenomenal athlete, Nader, and I think he showed that on Saturday, and in time, when he gets a little bit more confidence and starts pulling people around, because he is a quiet lad, he could be in the team for a long time, Naden.
Wayne Bridge debut. Satisfied with it?
Yeah, top stuff. I mean, he said himself, I think, afterwards that he ran out a little bit of steam towards the end, because he did some great runs up and down the flank as well as his defending. But what a big difference. I mean, nothing to be too detrimental to Garrido and Ball, who've tried as hard as they could this season. But you've got to say that Wayne Bridge did bring a little bit more class and quality. I think he let Antonio Valencia, but Valencia got past him once. And Valencia is one of the top wingers perhaps in world football at the moment. Real Madrid are supposed to be interested in signing him. I thought he had an excellent debut.
Right, we'll come back to football a little bit later, but if you're a Manchester City fan at the moment, Andy, the talking point isn't football, it's transfers. So what do you, as a former City captain, make of a £100 million footballer coming to Eastlands?
It's incredible, really. It just doesn't add up. You're talking 30, 40. I think 48 million for, was it Sedan?
Yeah, 47 of
and that was a few years ago, wasn't it?
But he was older, he was 29.
Yeah, so, if people have got the money to pay it and, that's what it's going to take to move him, then why not? It is beyond belief at the moment, but, that's the way football's going. It's fantasy world at the moment, so... it'll be great. Let's see if we can get him here first.
Well, Ian, me and you were talking on Saturday, and I said, I think this could be the biggest story we've ever covered in our combined careers in the media. And you said, well, maybe Rodney Marsh was as big in his day. Well, I thought about that afterwards, and it probably was in England, but we had people on from Brazil on Saturday and people from Italy. And as well as Italy and Brazil, all the sports pages in the Middle East are full of Manchester City. So there's a global dimension to this now, isn't there?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, the Premier League is huge. It's not just Manchester City. The whole Premier League has been attracting the world's top players for quite a while now. So I suppose it's inevitable that another one's going to come. It just happens to be now that it's our club, Manchester City, the team I've supported since I was a kid and reported on for a lot of my adult life, that have now got the money to be able to go and sign these players. And I must admit, it's really made me quite angry to hear the negativity in a lot of the national media and from other supporters saying how wrong and immoral it is to bring in these players. Well, I seem to remember that the other lot across the road broke the world transfer record 3 times. Nottingham Forest produced the first £1 million footballer in Trevor Francis under Brian Clough, so that wasn't quite as it seemed. This is just the going rate for a player these days. And you look at the wages, and people have criticised the wages as well. I was looking up the earnings of Meryl Streep, for example, in Mamma Mia. 20 million for 3 months' work, 4 months' work, something like that. So if you break that down, it's £1 million a week. Now, nobody's saying that's immoral. Nobody's saying that Meryl Streep shouldn't be getting that amount of money. But when a footballer gets that amount of money, and these are only ballpark figures, that's suddenly immoral and wrong. Well, of course, it's all immoral and wrong, isn't it? When you see what a nurse earns and when you see what normal people who are real heroes earn, of course it is. But you have to accept that that's the world we live in. So why not pay whatever it is to get one of the world's best players? I mean, United have got Rio Ferdinand reputedly on about £125,000 a week, so what's a couple more 100,000 here and there? I'm
not sure it's a real world, Andy. It's this parallel world that we escape to occasionally. It is obviously madness, but it was madness when they paid $15 million for Alan Shearer in the mid-90s. I can remember talking about that. So it's only the number of zeros on the end of the figures that changes. We take the madness, we talk about the football. Would Kaka be a good player for City? Because the bit that concerned me, Andy, you can see the sense of it from AC's point of view, trying to rebuild an ageing side. You can see why City would want Kaka. But Kaka himself seems a little bit reluctant. Do we want Kaka under duress?
I think you said something there a minute ago, which is the first time I thought of it in that way, where you said it was Brazil and Italy and Dubai. So this, look at the impact that this statement has made, going for Kaka, and maybe that's what they want. They want to send out a message where, we're not just going to try and compete in the Premier League. We want to win the Premier League. We want to win the European Cup. We want to be the biggest club in the world. And if it comes down to financial side of it, then we're going to do it, And that's a statement that they've made. Kaka, I think, if the deal's said and done, you're going to turn up because obviously he looks like the most professional role model that anyone's seen, from what people have said about him, on the pitch and off it. So it's going to, it'll be a fantastic thing for the city, for the club, and that will be perhaps the statement that says, this is not just a pipe dream. This is going to happen.
Now, Mark Hughes has said, though, according to the papers today, Ian, that it has to happen in this window, because if it gets to the summer, Real Madrid will have a new president in place and they could be major players for his signature. And no disrespect to us, but at the moment, from a purely football perspective, you could see the appeal of Real Madrid. So do you see that telescoping effect that it has to be done in the next 2 or 3 weeks?
I'm not so sure that Real Madrid really have the amount of money to be able to compete with City as it stands at the moment, so I'm not sure that's necessarily true. They're obviously investing a lot of time, City, by sending a delegation over today to Milan to try to move this forward, and they've still got another couple of weeks till the end of the window, so there's every possibility that what will be a very complex deal can be thrashed out. If they don't manage to do it by the end of the window, I wouldn't rule out it being resumed again in the summer. And I think one of the reasons it might be a very complex deal is something that Andy's just touched on there about the fact that the lad is not somebody who courts publicity in the way that some of the megastars do. He is a man of God, whatever your religious beliefs are. I'm not making any comment on that, but he does seem to be a different type of superstar.
He does, yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me if there's not more to this deal than you think. That maybe it's not about straightforward money, not just about personal greed. A lot of people say, why would he come to City? It's only for the money. Well, there might be other things that come out in the next week or two that tell us that it's not quite as straightforward as you think, and that it might be more to do with what he can achieve as a person for people around him.
Well, I understand that, but Andy, I've been banging this drum for a couple of weeks now, that if you're Kaka, and he's 27 in the spring, so he's coming into his absolute peak years, he's got maybe 4 or 5 years where he's going to be a serious contender for best player in the world. Wouldn't he, as a footballer, irrespective of money, be inclined to go where Champions League football is a given rather than come to City, which, with the best will in the world, is still a work in progress?
Yes, and it would probably be a lot easier to entice them players to the club if we were in the Champions League. But this is part of the journey, and hopefully in the next couple of seasons, we're going to be a big player in the Champions League. Then them players, will want to come to us. But as Ian said, it's money. If Madrid offer 110 million somehow in the summer for him, we'll offer 130 and we'll get him. And that's, because you're dealing with the club, I think, not exactly the player. And if the club says, thanks very much, but this is just too much for us to turn down, then they'll take it and say, now go and negotiate.
Well, it is interesting, this one, Ian, though, because talking about the appeal of football and trying to sell City to Kaka, but the way that this unfolds, the football implications of it, and it's not just for Kaka, because in the second half we're going to talk about Craig Bellamy, because that's looking increasingly like a done deal. But he was saying last week he'd rather go to Spurs from his own perspective. But again, money talks, that you just have this image of people being pushed on aeroplanes because it's a good deal for the club.
And the thing I'd say, is we get such little access to footballers, really, these days, that who knows what's really in the minds of these players. What is it that motivates Kaka? What is it that motivates Bellamy? Whenever we try to speak to players, it's always in a protected environment and for a limited amount of time. We don't really know what makes them tick. If Kaka has another reason for coming to City, great. If Bellamy wanted to go to Spurs but he's been persuaded to come to City, I don't think that's the end of the world, because if you're being really honest about it, a lot of players are mercenaries anyway, aren't they? But sometimes when you get underneath the skin of these things, it's not quite as black and white as the tabloids would have us believe. So, maybe there are other things here that are at play that we don't know about yet.
This is Ian Cheeseman. He's the Manchester City reporter at BBC Radio Manchester. And he, of course, is the former City captain, Andy Morrison. We're going to be talking a lot more about transfers, and we may even talk about football and Manchester City in part 2. We'll see you in 2. City Debate Show. With me today round the table, Ian Cheeseman and Andy Morrison. Right, we talked about Kaka, and I think every City fan is desperate to see how that unfolds. But in some ways, Ian, on a slightly more pragmatic level, let's talk about players who are only going 10, 20 million. Craig Bellamy. He was £6 million worth at 25 at Liverpool. Apparently we're going to pay 14 for him.
New record signing. People don't notice that, do they? More than Nicolas Anelka when he came. I think you've got to look at that as a relatively short-term signing. His injury record's not great. When he's at his best, he's a super player. He's fast. He poses a lot of threat. I'm sure Andy will tell you about that in a minute or two. So he's a short-term player. He'll be on side with what Mark Hughes is trying to do. He knows the player, doesn't have to settle in. He knows the Premier League. Great short-term signing to add a bit of blistering pace and a bit of something different. And let's not rule out this season yet a place in Europe. I mean, that might sound ridiculous. But
no, not with the way the league table is.
You look at the stats, it's not out of the question. I mean, 5th is guaranteed, 6th and 7th, depending on who wins the Cups. If you're looking at 7th, you're only looking 8-9 points away from that, 3 or 4 wins. So it's not without question. So 2 or 3 immediate impact signings can achieve that for you this season, and I think that's what Bellamy's got to be.
Now, you played against Bellamy.
Yep.
Did you like playing against him, Andy?
Nope. No, I've played against Craig on 3 occasions, and when you're playing at home and there's a lot of space in behind you, so I'm talking about when actually if you join City and City are playing away and teams are sort of maybe forced to come out and have a go, and they leave that space behind, and he makes very clever runs, and he is very, very quick, as quick as anyone in the Premier League, and that just gives us another dimension, really. I think I can't see him being as effective at home. I know it sounds crazy, but, with the way teams play deep against City now, you need the Robinhos and the Alanos, the little 1-2s and flicks around the corners to try and get in and create a chance, where I don't think that space will be to run in behind for Bellamy. But then, you go away from home, he's going to cause a lot of problems.
But he spends a fair bit of time on the treatment table, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's had a terrible run of injuries, and nobody really knows why. The sports science and the physios and the medical side of things are so good now. It's very rarely do you see players continually get injuries, hamstrings and groins and that. And I don't know what's behind that. But, hopefully the City medical staff would be the top and they'll sort it out and we'll get a run of a couple of seasons out of him, It seems crazy, as you were saying, a bit part player maybe or a stopgap for 14 million, just to come in and do a job for us. It really is crazy, isn't it?
Now, Ian, until this week, Bellamy wasn't a single entity. He came as a part of a double act, Bellamy and Parker. I thought he was solicitors. But where did Parker go in this equation?
I think West Ham have decided that they need to keep somebody, otherwise they could get involved in a relegation battle. Parker is their key midfield player, so I'm guessing that they're thinking that if they can push the price up for Bellamy, and they have done, then that will give them the breathing space to hang on to Park, and I can only assume that's what's happened.
What about De Jong? 18 million. Stopgap.
Yeah, the record won't last long if they get Bellamy, will it? Great young prospect. I can't say I'm an expert on De Jong. His reputation's good, his stats are good, he's the right age, he's the right position for what City need as well, especially with Didi Hamann now, past his best and maybe never going to play again with the injury. So, yeah, absolutely the right type of player, but I wouldn't profess to be an expert on him, but he looks good. Right,
now here's a really difficult question for you, Andrew, because according to the papers last week, City are going to try and get 2 world-class players for every position. Fine. But just say we get Kaka and we get Rocky Santa Cruz and we get Craig Bellamy. What formation does he go with?
I haven't got a clue.
Should we give that one to Ian?
Yes, pass it on.
Go on then. What formation is he going to go with?
I don't know. I mean, I know one thing that the structure that the owners seem to be going for is 4 Galacticos, 4 very good quality internationals, and 4 ideally that have come up through the youth team, and that's a nice structure. I do like the principle behind that. Getting 2 top quality players for every position, of course, is what you aim for, because then you can rotate your squad a little bit. You can play a very strong side in the cups.
Well, Chelsea got very close to having a Wednesday and a Saturday side, didn't they, a couple of seasons ago?
You've got to go for that, haven't you? But whether you're not going to get 2 Kakas, you're not going to get Messi as the reserve player and Kaka as a senior player.
Set the bar high, lad. Set the bar high.
Actually, now you say it. Why not?
But it is interesting, and I know that the old football adage is, Andy, that you can't have too many good players. But if he gets even 3/4 of the players that he appears to be going for, it is going to be trying to get a quart into a pint pot, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think I think we spoke about this before, where the way football is going now, players are. They're not asked to play the 3 games in a week. They're getting taken out, and if you've got an adequate replacement to go in, as good or nearly as good, then your top players have to accept it, that they're going to be rested. I think those across the road have done it the last couple of games, completely changed their midfield for the Bolton game, the Wigan game, and the game before. So you need quality and depth, to keep players fresh, and if it's all part of the squad, and there's a good relationship between the manager and the players, it won't be a problem asking players to sit out for a week and then come back in, and it'll keep everything going and keep it fresh, as I've just said.
The tough bit will be selecting the European Cup final team and keeping everybody happy from that.
We'll worry about give him the problem. Give him the problem. One thing though, you touched upon it. I think most City fans, most football fans anywhere, love this idea that kids will come through the ranks, if only because they will have that greater affinity with the club. So Daniel Sturridge looks as though he's a real prospective top player. Chelsea tried to sign him. But in the papers this morning, Ian, that his contract's still not been sorted out. And there's bound to be somewhere at the back of your mind thinking, are they that bothered about the kids if they've got the money to go out and sign the Kakas of this world?
Well, they're bothered about the kids. I don't doubt that for one second. And the job that the academy done there is brilliant. So, you'd like to think that some more will come through. It'll get tougher and tougher to come through. I saw City's Youth Cup game then at Portsmouth the other day. Half their team were youngsters that had been brought in from abroad. City will have to do the same thing, or I'm sure will do the same thing, and they'll try and recruit the future Maradonas or the Messis or whatever at 14, 15, 16, so that they then come through their own academy, which means that if the rules of the Premier League change and you've got to have a certain quota in, you can get round it that way. So I'm sure that type of thing will happen, but it will change. It is going to get tougher for a player like Daniel Sturridge now. And one of the rumours at the moment is that the Rocky Santa Cruz deal could see Daniel Sturridge go the other way as part of that deal. Not saying that will happen, but don't rule that possibility out. He's a fantastic-looking player, some great skills, created 1 or 2 great goals just recently, although he has got a bit of a tendency, perhaps because he's young and he's trying to establish himself as being a bit selfish, but I'm sure if they can coach that out of him, then he can be a cracking player. But whether with the big names coming in now, he's got a long-term future, remains to be seen.
Well, it is an interesting one, Andy. I mean, the fans do have this affinity with local players, but have they got a realistic place in the future of top-level football when there's so much money available to go and cherry-pick talent from across the world?
I think time will only tell. You can't shout that now because we don't know how good they are coming through. But it's going to be more difficult than it was perhaps a few years ago. If you're saying that City at the moment, say a top 10 team, we have a top 1 academy.
Yeah.
It's better than anyone. I mean, the structure, I think, your top 4 clubs will be looking and saying, well, hang on a sec, what are they doing at City that's bringing through these player after player after player? And, you know, and I'm sure they're producing the benchmark, really, for the future, the way City had done it. I think it is a worry, and it is a worry for probably the coaches there, to look at it and say, well, where do we fit in this big plan? But, you know, I'd like to think that they've been spoke to and been said, yeah, you keep producing the players and they'll be given their chance. If they're not good enough, then they'll be moved on. If they are good enough, they'll stay in there, and that's the way it'll be.
Well, you just hope that the opportunities will be there for those who do have the talent, because it is a mad world that we live in, and you can go and get anybody from all over the world. If you're 18 and you've come through the ranks and the person blocking your route into the first team is 31, you can outweight them. If they suddenly go out and spend 20-odd million or 200 million on a 23-year-old, suddenly your world looks a very different place, doesn't it?
Well, you could be a bit harsh and say that City's failure to be a top-notch club has actually helped City's academy. Because if City had been where we've always wanted them to be, in that top four competing, it would have been so much harder for these lads to break through. That's not to in any way undermine the work that the academy does, but that is one of the advantages that City's academy does have.
Right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so let's turn back to football. Reluctantly, but we'll turn back to football. The next three games: Middlesbrough, Newcastle at home, Stoke away. Realistically, if we are going to mount a challenge for Europe, you've got to take 7 points out of those 9, haven't you?
Why not 9 out of 9?
Well,
they're all winnable games.
I was trying to be reasonable here.
Well, I'm being reasonable. I mean, I was so impressed by the victory against Wigan. I really think that will be the turning point. You know, people talk for years about the Fergie, the Oxford game and all the rest of it. I wonder whether the Forest game in the Cup will be that one that goes down in folklore for City. The 3 games coming up are all eminently winnable. You've now got Craig Bellamy in your side, probably. You might have Kaka in your side, you might have Rocky Santa Cruz, you've already got Wayne Bridge. The quality of that side has improved greatly. Why not? Newcastle at home, eminently winnable. Middlesbrough at home, they're on the slide, eminently winnable. Stoke away is the hardest of the 3. But City beat them 3-0 at home with the old team, as it were, not too long ago, eminently winnable. So you've got to look at 9 points from those.
Right, all right, I'll bet. About you, Andy, would you take 9? Or would you settle for 7?
Settle for 7,
yeah,
because I think there will be one tough game in amongst them. You know, Newcastle are wounded at the moment, you know, so they're always going to be dangerous. Middlesbrough as well. There's them teams at the bottom that are fighting for their lives, you know, that turn up and shut up shop and try and nick a goal and make it really difficult. And in the past, when a good performance seems to have been followed by a bit of a sloppy one, and if it can get that out of it, then it's possible the next 3 games could. And then that you're pushing up then, looking at the top 8, if you win them 3 games.
Right on the tails, then.
Right on the tails.
Many thanks to Ian Cheeseman, who's the City reporter at BBC Radio Manchester. Many thanks, as always, to Andy Morrison. Always great to see him round the table. And who knows, he'll be wearing the blue of Manchester City when we sit round here and do it all over again. See you next time on the City Debate Show. See you then.